So, welcome everybody. So excited to have you here. This is this I think of this as like a really amazing crossover event. Um, First of all, my name is Jess Chase. I'm the Bold Associate Artistic Director at Northern Stage. And something I'm really passionate about is our Spot On series, which is a series of free lectures that are intended to give greater context to our main stage programming. So, as you may know, and if you don't, you should, Northern Stage is bursting with theater right now. We have three productions being made this fall. We have one currently available virtually called Dutch Masters, which is this is the spot on for that particular show. So I'll talk more about it later. We have Stephanie Everett's It's Fine, I'm Fine running live on stage in the Barrett Center for the Arts. And that will be coming out virtually in a couple of weeks as well for those of you who don't yet feel comfortable coming into the theater. And we have The Naked Librarian and The Harmful Effects of Tobacco both being released about 4 weeks from now. So we have so much main stage programming going on, really, really incredible shows. And Spot On is about going deeper into a topic that one of our shows tackles, and really understanding some better context so that you can watch the show with a little bit greater nuance, greater understanding of the issues that are at play in that particular work of theater. Theater's so amazing because it combines literature, it combines philosophy, it combines history, it combines social issues, it combines so many different things. So that's why we use Spot On to give us a little bit of context on the works that we choose for our main stage. And so this is a crossover event, I like to say, because we've also been doing a wonderful series that we did twice over the summer called Community Date, which was really, very much spurred by the Black Lives Matter protests in June and the whole movement nationwide. And it was, in concert with Northern Stage, really committing to more anti-racist learning, to understanding that we, as a predominantly white institution in a predominantly white region, want to understand better the ways that we have upheld white supremacy and that we have, not done as well as we could have, and to sort of continue the learning process. It was something we were sort of I think we were in process on already and really wanted to bring the learning that we were doing into our community. So that's what Community Date became about. We had two sessions over the summer on the book White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo and unpacking the information therein. And now we have our third session right now. So I think of today as like a very special crossover event of several programs that we're really excited about. So what next? I want to say a few things about Zoom. By now we're all familiar with it, I think. But you've all been very good also by muting yourselves and not leaving your microphone open while a presenter is talking. So we ask you to do that. At certain points in today's session, there will be community participation. And when that happens, we ask that you raise your hand via Zoom, which means clicking the participants button at the bottom of your screen. And then you should see like sort of a white panel with the list of participants come up. And then on the bottom left of that, you'll see a raise hand button. I know it sounds kind of complicated, but if you haven't done it before, it's pretty easy to find. And then we'll use that for our participation tool. And then also, if you just want to raise your physical hand, Kerrigan will maybe look out for you and we'll try and catch you that way as well. So I think that's our Zoom rules. We always are very cognizant of creating extra security measures so that we can't be Zoom hacked. Hopefully that won't happen today. If anything untoward happens, we will kick the person out immediately and hopefully just be able to resume. But we are always vigilant for that. I think that's everything. And then I would recommend using speaker view. There's two different views, speaker view and gallery view. You can use speaker view maybe when the presentation is going on. You can use gallery view when we're all participating. Totally up to you, but there's a lot of fun ways to experience it. So, so this play is particularly about, this Spot On conversation is particularly about the play Dutch Masters by Greg Keller, which is it was our first Tiny Necessary theater piece that we've released. And I do want to see maybe a show of hands for those of you of your video on who has seen it thus far. Have you seen it yet? Okay,
Mm.
good. Little handful of people. So some folks have seen it, some folks haven't. So we'll try not to give any major spoilers. But suffice it to say, Dutch Masters is about without giving too much away, it is about a particular hot summer day in the early 1990s in New York City, where two teenage boys, one black boy and one white boy, meet on the subway. And it is about what starts as a chance meeting and unfolds in an incredibly surprising, really riveting, and wonderful way. And Dutch Masters, really within it, as you'll see when you watch it, it really delves into many issues of class, issues of race, and we've it's a play that we've really been excited about presenting for a long time, and especially because of the conversations that come along with it, and conversations that we want to be having with our audience up here in the Upper Valley. And so with that, I'm going to stop speaking in a moment, but I first just want to introduce Brittany Belazier, who is our incredible facilitator for today. Now, Brittany, some of you may have met in our first two White Fragility conversations. You may have met her when she was up here performing in the Mountaintop a few years ago. We have loved working with her as an actor, as a facilitator, as a member of our Northern Stage community. She has acted at many of the premier regional theaters around the country, the Guthrie, the McCarter, La Jolla Playhouse, Northern Stage, obviously the top. She has been on TV on The Nick and other shows. She was named one of the top 10 actors of the decade in the Twin Cities for her work at the Guthrie, which is really incredible. And she's also a teaching artist and a diversity and inclusion performing consultant. So she has done a lot of this work. She's also an educator, and just does both of these things so incredibly beautifully. So welcome, Brittany, and
Thanks,
I'll be here
Jess.
if you need anything. Take it away.
Okay. Thank you, Jess. As always, it's so great to collaborate with Northern Stage. I absolutely love you guys and love being up there. So thanks again for having me. This conversation, we don't have that much time. So I think it's going to be, Jess, we said an hour, roughly an hour. So that's, just to put that in your mental space. So I'm here just kind of to start the conversation with you all, and hopefully you guys will have an opportunity to finish and delve deeper into this topic of microaggressions. And so I wanted to start off by doing kind of like a rough timeline based on the research that I've come across, is that microaggressions, if some of you may know this already, but the Harvard psychiatrist Chester Pierce coined the phrase microaggressions in 1970, 50 years ago. So this definition or concept has essentially evolved from 1970 until 2020. So when we think about 1970, Chester Pierce essentially said that the word microaggression to him meant that it was a constant verbal and nonverbal abuse stemming from racism or coming from a racist white person. He identified these individual abuses as micro to distinguish between the macroaggressions of racist violence and policies. 1970. Now, when we think of microaggression in 2020, there are a myriad of different definitions from various organizations who have also done very similar work in diversity and such. And so when Diversity EDU describes microaggressions, they say that it's seemingly minor statements, behaviors, and environments that communicate exclusionary or derogatory messages. According to Daryl Wing Su, a professor of counseling and psychology at Columbia University, defines it as brief, everyday exchanges that send denigrating messages to certain individuals because of their group membership. And according to Ibram X. Kendi, who is the writer of How to Be an Anti-Racist, very great book, he actually believes that abuse is a more accurate description than microaggression because he says that it accurately describes the action and its effects on people. And some of those effects he calls out as distress, anger, worry, depression, anxiety, pain, fatigue, suicide, just to name a few. So I wanted to kind of give you all that rough timeline because the definition has definitely evolved. And from it being between a particular group of people, where Chester Pierce coined the phrase in interaction with Black and white people, now it's evolved more into people who are a part of marginalized groups. So when we think of who it affects, it could affect anyone depending on their gender, their race, if they're a part of the LGBTQIA plus community, if they have a various different religious backgrounds or even mental diversities like depression or anxiety or bipolar disorder, just to name a few. So anyone a part of those marginalized groups can essentially at this point receive microaggression to them or even witness it happening to others. So some personal accounts that I kind of asked a couple of friends of mine to give me some accounts of when they've experienced what they would see or say as a microaggression, how they define it in their world, right? So it could be work environment, it could be home environment, it could be just amongst friends and family, a social environment, but whatever they deemed as microaggression. And a couple of my friends who are also Black women, they recounted, I should say, some experiences that they've had in their workplace. And so I just wanted to share a couple of those with you just to get a specific example of what some women, some Black women have experienced in their life, right? So one of my friends who is an engineer, she's a chemical engineer, has worked in this field, I want to say for 20 years at this point. Like she's gotten promoted, very great, good at what she does, knows what she's doing. And a coworker of hers was recounting an experience that her boyfriend and her had during Halloween, right? So she was telling my friend about how her boyfriend dressed up in blackface for Halloween. That was his costume. And as she was sharing this story, she was laughing. And my friend, because they have a rapport, shared very confidently and vulnerably with her, saying, that actually isn't funny and it's offensive to me. And her reaction to my friend was kind of dismissive. She was like, oh, you're being too sensitive. You're being too politically correct. It was funny. It was fun. Right. And so my friend was offended and spoke to HR about it. And obviously, HR did follow up with the coworker. And as a result of that, the coworker stopped talking to my friend. She stopped communicating with her altogether at their work. So then this very amicable relationship at work became a very tense situation because my friend chose to speak out about something that was offensive racially in her workplace that she was no longer going to take and accept. So that's an example of how someone can react when they feel that their actions were intended for good and for fun, but when someone is actually offended by it and how that impacts their lives and their livelihood. Another example I have is actually my personal example. When I was moving, I grew up in Philadelphia. I was raised there up until I was 13. And while I was in Philadelphia, I went to a Quaker school. And I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with Quaker school education, but I absolutely loved it. I believe it's one of the strongest, and basically when I went there, that's how I feel. But now it could have changed, but I doubt it. But I believe Quaker school educations are very diverse, and I feel like they're extremely inclusive. So I grew up, that was my first educational experience, right? I went to a school literally with the same people from kindergarten until 7th grade. And then I moved to a very small town in New Jersey where I live now, Scotch Plains, New Jersey. And because my parents were adamant on kind of giving me the same type of quality of education, they chose Scotch Plains because it had a very great school system, even though most of the schools in this town are public schools and not private schools. So, based on my education in the Quaker school, I was placed into an accelerated English class in my 8th grade year. And I had no idea, actually. I just was going to class because that's where it said I should be at this time of day with this particular teacher at this, with this subject, right? So I had no idea that it was an accelerated class. But what I did notice is that I was one of 2 Black students in that class. The other Black student was a Black boy, Gary Fletcher, very smart. Most of his classes were accelerated. And then at the time, it was just me. I was the only Black girl in that English class. And because I was in a new environment and I could tell that a lot of those students also, like me, went to the same schools with the same kids because it's a very small town. They all knew each other and were very comfortable there. And as a child, I was extremely shy. So it took me a while to start participating in these classes in this new school. Once I got comfortable with doing that, I noticed that my English teacher refused to call on me. I would raise my hand all the time. I started getting comfortable in the class, started getting comfortable with my classmates. I would raise my hand all the time, and she would literally look me dead in my face and turn the other way, either pick on a student whose hand was not up at all, or pick on someone else whose hand was raised. And eventually I told my parents, because it wasn't something immediately that I noticed, but eventually, because of the energy, I started telling my parents that this particular teacher was not calling on me. And then my mom had a teacher parent conference meeting with her. And then after that, everything changed. Her energy towards me was much different. And as a child, I had no idea what it was about. I didn't even think about it. I didn't even think that it could be because I was a Black student, or I just thought it was, oh, maybe I'm just new in the school. And then as I got older, my mom actually shared with me what the teacher had told her. And essentially, the teacher had told her, because I had befriended some of the kids that she thought were troubled students at the school, she associated with me with them, and thus thought that I was not going to be a good student in her class, not prepared, not smart enough to be there. And I didn't even know that I was in an accelerated class. I was just kind of going with the flow, right? So that was her perceived or assumption of me because I'm a new student, and she saw me hanging out with the troubled girls, which were all Black girls. And that assumption basically pertained, it informed how she treated me. It informed how I received her teaching in that class. And after a while, if you think about that effect on a child, the only other thing I can think of is poor grades. Like, actually, what she was perpetuating on me is what actually ended up happening, because I wasn't excelling in the class in the beginning because I was never picked on. So I never knew whether or not I was doing well or not doing well in her class. And so that's just an example. And Ibram, if you've read How to Be an Anti-Racist, Ibram X. Kendi mentions a very similar story, but he witnessed his classmate being treated this way, and how he witnessed the reaction of that energy is the student became very defeated, sad, didn't perform very well in that class. So those are some microaggressions that can also happen. When a white woman walks down the street and holds her purse closer to her when she passes a Black person, or when someone is in Central Park bird watching and essentially asks a woman to leash her dog and is then called the cops on, that is microaggression. When you have someone in your workplace who, if you're the only person of color there and you then feel like all the questions are coming to you and you have to answer for the whole entire Black community, that is also included in my definition of microaggression. Traffic stops for no reason, which is how a lot of the Black bodies in this country today are killed, just from a traffic stop. Those are all microaggressions. When you think of being followed in a store for a store clerk, either assuming that you can't afford the merchandise or assuming that you're going to steal something because of how you look, that is considered microaggression. It all, to me, stems very closely to how someone perceives and assumes, and what's someone's intent and what's their impact. So that's kind of going to lead us into the conversation of two comparisons that I think are tied very closely to microaggression. But before we go there, I do want to kind of ask you all, after you've heard this very quick timeline of definitions that I've come across and other experiences that have explained some microaggressions, can you think of any time, if you are willing to share? I know this is very personal information and a very vulnerable conversation for us all to have. So one, I want to say thank you for sharing ahead of time. And we're just going to take a couple, but can you think of ever a time where you believe that you've perpetuated a microaggression or have been on the receiving end of one or witnessed it happening to someone else? And in that case, how did you feel in that moment, whether you were perpetuating it or receiving it or witnessing it? If anyone can share how they actually felt in that moment. And you can use the raise your hand. Will I be able to see the raised hand, Jess?
Yeah.
There again?
If you
Okay.
Participants, and you see the participant panel, you should see raise hand.
Whose hands are raised.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay.
Great.
So if there's anyone that wants to dive in.
And yeah, Bob, are you?
Kerrigan? Oh.
I had a very, very traumatic experience as a child when visiting the South, and I witnessed two men walking down the sidewalk of a guest house that we had stopped at to see if we could have a reservation for that night. And these two men snatched a ball from a young black girl and cut it in half and threw it on the ground. And I was just totally dumbfounded. I couldn't understand why, what was going on. This child wasn't doing anything other than, and one of the white men said, "You can't do this on my sidewalk." And now that's not microaggression. That's overt aggression. But the feeling I had was one of total shock and unfairness. And what was this adult doing to this other human being? And that laid the groundwork for all my reactions with all people, regardless of their melanin in their skin.
Right. Yeah, that was a macro, I should say.
That was very macro.
Macro versus micro. Is there anyone else?
Yeah, I see Caroline and then Jack.
Oh, okay.
Hi.
Caroline. Hi, Caroline.
Hi. I work at a university, and we had an incident last year at Halloween. Our population, we have about 18% Latinx students, and 3 students decided to dress up as ICE agents and show up at the college pub where there were a lot of Latinx students, and we have undocumented students on campus, and it just incited a lot of fear among students. And then the repercussions of that conversation, I mean, were really intense after the fact.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you, Caroline.
Thank you. Yeah.
Jack?
Hello. I have a specific instance where I perpetuated a microaggression with 2 of my friends, Jazz and Dorisha. And I accidentally called Dorisha Jazz, and they're both Black women. And Dorisha had an issue with that because she was saying how that's not right. You're just saying that because we look similarly. And my first instinct was to be like, it was an honest mistake. But then I had to realize that, this is how she feels, and that, I need to respect that and see that and make sure that that never happens again.
Yeah. Thank you, Jack. I appreciate your reaction because oftentimes when your intent isn't for bad, you intended good. And oftentimes when someone still is offended by that good intent, even though you made a mistake, you didn't mean it, people can get offensive to it. They could get super defensive, and then their reaction then makes everyone uncomfortable. It then changes the dynamic of the relationship, which is what happened to my friend at her workplace. And things like that happen to me all the time, whether I'm in a theater or whether I'm at work. I used to work at a hedge fund and I was the only Black woman there. So I experienced a ton of microaggression. And I knew because the environment was it was a very low key hedge fund comparative to other corporate offices. I mean, they rarely wore suits. Everyone had on khakis. They were very casual in that office. So I knew that everyone's intention, for the most part, I should say, not all, but for the most part, the intention was just for good, just to get to know me as a person and as an individual. But some comments that were made towards me, I would be like, do you expect something different of me because I'm the only Black woman in the office? Do you expect me not to be dressed nicely? I got commented on how I presented myself all the time. And I'm like, am I supposed to come in and you guys have to correct what I'm wearing? It was weird. But because I hadn't started my diversity work until after I left that environment. And so now I have a lot more language to use to communicate to people, but I didn't actually know what to say and how to communicate if I was feeling uncomfortable about something that wasn't intended for me to receive it that way, if that makes sense. So there's one more. Oh, there's two more Pete.
I was like, we have two more hands.
Do we have time? Okay, we're just gonna take these last two. So Yulia,
you were close. No, it's all right. I actually have two quick snippets. One is from a long time ago. I was an exchange student here in Vermont, and I was taking English class, and the teacher was trying to teach a lesson on anti-racism. That was 1995, to place it in the timeline. And she asked all the kids, she's like, who are you going to ask what time it is? You know, nobody had cell phones back then. If you're walking down the street along the Central Park, who are you going to ask? And that actually was the moment, and kids shared their opinions, but that was the moment where I realized that where I came from in Siberia, we had racism, except it was against people from Kazakhstan, which was right across the border from where I lived. And I said, oh my goodness, I know people who just do these microaggressions or do more to other people in this my own country. And people at the time, and even now, say, oh, Russia has no racism. Oh, that's not true. But that was one like huge realization at 16-year-old. And then recently we went in September to New York City, and I was with my daughter and with my friend, and we were walking down the street along the Central Park. And my friend had a daughter too. And we were kind of in a rush, and I stopped. Some young gentleman was selling CDs just to make money. I knew he was not selling anything huge, you know, just because I've seen several people trying to do that. But I stopped because I knew I had $5 in the pocket. And I felt the way my friend looked at me, that she didn't want me to do it, simply because, well, that's at least how I read it, because of what she thought, you know, of the activities that man was doing. And I really didn't care of the quality of the CD music on. I just wanted to be supportive because I had these $5 and he would use them. He could use them better than I could. And I felt, now that you're talking about it, that maybe that was, my friend, I respect her. She's a great person, but I just felt funny getting that look from her. Like, what are you doing? Like, get away from this person kind of thing. And it was weird.
Thank you.
Thank you
for sharing that. And then Lynn. Hi, Lynn. Oh, Lynn, you're muted.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, it's okay. Okay. So I just have a quick one, and it's actually based on gender. And that is when I was part of a decent sized management group and I was in human resources. we had a COO who enjoyed sending out group emails to the management group, of which I was the only female, saying, "Dear brethren,"
Mm,
constant, constant, making his point.
yeah. Thank you, Lynn. Yeah, that we're so used to and programmed, all of us actually, to in our vocabulary nowadays to clump gender, women into certain words that represent males, right? And because there may only be one or two women, no one acknowledges that and still will say, hey guys, there are women in there, or brethren, if there, and we talk a lot about that in my diversity inclusion work, because we talk a lot about gender in that work as well, and how some women are actually offended when you approach them and say guys, when there's a group of both men and women a part of it. So that's definitely something to think about in terms of coded language and microaggressions all kind of clumped into one. Okay, so when we think of microaggressions, there are two concepts and comparisons that I kind of want to talk to you guys about, and that's intent versus impact, and perception versus assumption, right? So if we take intent versus impact first, and we kind of think, what does this mean? And why is it important to know the difference between intent versus impact? And when we're in a diverse environment, any environment for that matter, one must be extremely careful with the words you choose and your actions, because to you, those words and actions can have a totally different meaning or impact to someone else. So I'll take the example of a joke. Oftentimes, jokes are based on stereotypes and cultural norms. So they don't resonate with everyone, right? But it's sometimes used to make light of or poke fun at something or someone. So oftentimes a joke is intended to be funny and to lighten the mood, but it could end up offending someone else. So like the example that I brought up about the woman talking about her boyfriend dressing up in blackface, she thought that was a joke. She was sharing that with a coworker, thinking that that story would also be funny to that coworker because it was funny to her, but it actually offended her coworker. So when we think of the jokes that we've given, and I kind of, because of time, I just kind of want you guys to just think, and you don't have to share it, but just think about if you've ever told a joke, and it could be about anything, but in this particular case, let's think about it in terms of race or gender or religious background. But if you've ever told a joke and it backfired, and how you actually felt when that person on the receiving end of your joke was like, that's not funny. Actually, I'm offended, or that's rude, or that's, insensitive. If you can think of that time, and then also take it one step further and think how you felt when that person said that your joke was offensive. Because your reaction to someone voicing their hurt is also extremely important in this manner, right? Because we think about how we reacted. If someone, like, I'll take Jack, I'll use your example, your experience. He was actually extremely open to hearing his friend say, actually, please make sure that you get our names right. We are two different people. We may look similar, but we are two different individuals, and therefore should be respected in that way with our names being correct. That's not how she said it, but that's how I interpreted the story, Jack. Go with it. So if you think of that, he was actually extremely open to hearing, oh my God, I didn't intend for that, but I apologize if that was offensive. I will do better. I will do better. Sometimes not everyone's reaction is that. A lot of people's reaction is you're too sensitive, you're being too politically correct, you need to loosen up, you're uptight. But that reaction can send the person who's coming at you very vulnerably into an uncomfortable dynamic with you now. Because now that you said a joke or you said something that you didn't mean, but you intended it to be good, you intended it to lighten the mood, but the impact of what happened was something different. So if we think of the intent, which is intention or purpose, and we think of impact, which is to have a strong effect on someone or something, we can think of also it coincides with what they are, who they are, and what they did. So the person who intended for good didn't mean for you to be offended. It's about what they did, right? It coincides with what they did. However, you can also think in everyday feminism, I came across this topic that if someone intended harm, then they must inherently be a harmful person, right? So if their intention was to hurt your feelings or to do anything that would cause hurt, then, maybe they are someone that's considered a hurtful person. But more than likely, that person was intended for good and just didn't know that they hurt your feelings. So then you kind of have to go with what they did as opposed to who they are as a person. And it's kind of a loose definition, especially when it comes to racism, because a lot of racist acts that people have on a daily basis doesn't necessarily mean that they're racist individuals. It could very well mean that they just don't know that what they did was offensive or considered racist or considered prejudice or considered misogynist, right? So I like to think, even though everyone is not like this, but I like to think that everyone intends for good. And if it impacts me in a negative way, I'd like to communicate that to them. So intent versus impact, right? So when we think of this concept and we think of microaggressions, we have to conclude that an intent of microaggression can be based on an assumption. If someone perpetuates a microaggression, it could connect to the assumption that that person has of that other person. And that assumption can be steeped in stereotypes. It can be rooted in a purpose or an intention to lighten the mood, to be strategic. Like my friend's boss, or I didn't tell you this example, but a friend of mine's boss told her when she was getting hired that she couldn't ask for any more money. This is all that we could give you. We can't afford to give you anything higher in this salary. And then come to find out a white woman who is comparable in experience and education was hired a couple months later and got paid more than my friend who was a Black woman, right? So in that case, I feel like her boss was trying to be strategic. They were trying to be proactive. Like we're not gonna be able to give you more, so let me just tell her now so she doesn't ask. That's a microaggression. And it's also someone who's like, oh, how can I make this situation good so it doesn't turn into something that's not good, right? Or someone who's being safe or cautious or smart. All of these assumptions can be rooted, but can also cause a microaggression because your impact can actually be traumatizing or degrading or embarrassing or offensive to another person. If we think of traffic cops, and if someone is like, excuse me, I need to just plug in my computer. If a cop is like, oh, I'm stopping you because you're driving erratically, but you think, you're driving the speed limit. You took a full complete stop at a stoplight or a stop sign, but you're still being stopped. Why? Is that cop trying to be safe? Is the cop trying to be proactive? Are they just trying to get their ticket numbers in for that month? But then it's oftentimes if I was in that position, could assume that, okay, I'm doing everything right and I still get stopped. Why is this cop stopping me? Is it because I'm a woman? Is it because I'm Black? So then a whole bunch of gymnastics happens in our heads if we're a part of microaggressions. We start assuming ourselves. Why is it? Is it because of how I look? And so that ties into the perceptions versus assumptions, right? And then we have to differentiate what those two things represent. So the key difference, I would say, between the two, between perceptions and assumption, is that a perception is how something or someone is regarded, interpreted, and understood. And an assumption is how a fact or statement is accepted as true or certain without proof. So perceptions are based on senses and intuition and can sometimes be correct. Assumptions tend to be further away from the truth. So if we think of perceptions, we all on this call, there's 24 of us, we all have differing perceptions because it's based on our own lived experiences, right? It's based on our own background, it's based on other assumptions that we've had from just experiences and education that we've, gained along the way. But we make assumptions every day on any and everything, daily. We even make assumptions on someone else's actions and intentions and interpret how they somehow can behave. So if my teacher assumed because I hung out with troubled students, she assumed that I would also be troubled and thus treated me that way, which is how she perpetuated her microaggression on me.
Just a minute, I gotta
Not
turn this damn thing off.
Not knowing that that's actually further from the truth. I didn't befriend these girls because I thought they were troubled. I befriended them because they befriended me as a new student. I'm coming into a new environment. I don't know them I don't know how they behaved in school or, I don't know any of that. I'm getting to know them and they were extremely nice to me and are my friends to this day. And did that stop me from excelling educationally in my life? No. But how my teacher treated me affected how I performed in her class. So her perpetuation of microaggression on me affected me and it impacted me in a negative way because of her assumption. So I'm trying to tie all these things in just to kind of give you guys an example of how it could be a domino effect, how a microaggression can actually impact someone and how it's based on an assumption. So then we think of Dutch Masters, the play, which I love, and I need to reserve so I can watch this because I just read the play and was like, oh, mind blown. Because I've lived in New York, you all, I'll just say, because I've lived in New York for 9 years, I know oh so well the experience of being on a New York subway with a whole bunch of different types of people. And I witnessed microaggressions on a daily basis and received them myself, just being on a subway car from going to point A to point B to point C to point D. And it was just reading the play it just hit me so hard because I've definitely been in the situation where someone has started talking to me and I'm kind of like, who are you? Because it's New York and New York is just known for every single thing under the sun. And it's kind of like, you're sitting there like, hey, are you talking to me? Okay. And I feel like this is what this play is, but for those that have seen it already, and of those who might have read it and not seen it, it's a prime example of how one character, Steve, in this particular play, has so many assumptions about Eric, which is the other kid in the play. And you see it unfold. I'm not going to tell you, what happens, but you just see how having an assumption of someone unfolds when you don't know that person. And you're actually kind of blown away by the interaction that you can have with a person, not knowing them, but you've had so many assumptions and how that actually affects your response when someone comes to you and you have no idea what their intention is. And it can affect it in a very negative way, but it can also be a very enlightening experience, which is why I love this place so much, because it gives you an idea of how something that looks like it's going to be something, one thing, and then it becomes something completely different. And how that interaction informs us on an everyday basis when we encounter people who we don't know, who come from differing backgrounds, who look different from us. So if we think of all of that and we just think about our impact with a person who differs from us, how your words and actions will have a lasting impact on their lives, right? How you interact with someone who is different from you, with your actions and your words, can have a lasting impact on their lives. And it is up to you and it's up to us to continue the work and conversation so that your impact is actually for the greater good. So I'm not sure if anyone else has any comments. That's the end of my presentation. But if you all have comments you'd like to share, or just anything that I said that resonated with you, I'd love to hear some feedback. Jess?
Yeah, I love that. And I am curious for those who have seen Dutch Masters already, are there moments or, sort of specific things that really tied into what we learned today that you saw in the play? So I'm curious about that, like little moments or connections. So yeah, open to all of the above.
In this day and age, what I'm hearing in part is that we all need to hesitate before we speak. And what is it like for a woman to respond to a strange man in a situation who has no intentions other than communicating with another human being? How do you go about approaching that situation rather than we all walk around with our faces in our appliances and not speaking to anybody?
Yeah. And I'm wondering too, oh, you're welcome, Robin. I'm wondering too if, I understand when you say the word hesitate, but I want to offer just thinking or being completely open when engaging with someone else, and not necessarily hesitation, if that makes sense. Because we also want to be super comfortable, right, with ourselves when we're approaching others. And I know it's sometimes easy to tell when someone is nervous or when someone is like hesitant. And so I guess I would offer to just be open and mindful, because with the conversations that we have, you're more aware and you're more able to engage in the conversation and know, like, look, I know that I may be coming from a place of ignorance. I may be coming from a place but I really just wanted to tell you such and such and such and such. Or I really just wanted to ask you such and such and such and such. Because sometimes disclaimers, I like to call them, actually level the playing field. They're kind of like, oh, okay, this person, is not quite sure how to have this conversation, but they're willing to have the conversation. And so I'm going to be here and open to receive it, because I know that their intention is mindful and that it wants the best and the good for both of us. I don't know.
I want
my thought.
Can I pull out something also that you said earlier, Brittany? You said that you had sort of been in some situations earlier in your career before you started your facilitation training where you didn't have the language yet to respond to the situations. You didn't have you do now. And I think, to me, this is what these workshops are about. This is what reading is about. I really also recommend How to Be an Anti-Racist. I mean, that book and your continued learning will continue to, as Brittany's saying, like, make you more comfortable and open. And also, willing, and people do make mistakes, but like if you're open and willing to learn, then that openness communicates. And the more learning you do, the less you're likely to get defensive, or
Yes.
when you're learning something. So I would say, like, yeah, it's the openness, but it's also the ongoing learning will give you more and more language to use. So I feel like that's a valuable part of it too.
Agreed. Agreed. Is there anyone else?
Yulia's hand as well.
I just wanted to
Oh.
speak up quickly. There was definitely a moment several moments when you watched the Dutch Masters where you're like, oh, okay, this is feeling, I know how this person might be feeling, and you can feel those microaggressions. But I also wanted to bring up, so hesitate to judge. I would like to use the word hesitate. I kept like, just stop, pause, don't judge yet. Learn more about the person. Because that stood out with me when the previous speaker used it. I kept thinking, hesitate to judge, don't judge, just hold off before you know them, because that was like a theme through the whole Dutch Masters play for me. And it was interesting that during a talk back, Carol mentioned that play does not get staged very often, and I think maybe it's because of that uncomfortable feeling that I think Brittany brought up back in the community talk first time. Like, people don't like feeling comfortable, and they just need to get over it and learn. But I absolutely love that play, and I love being uncomfortable, and I loved learning. And I think that we just need to bring in droves of everybody and anybody, whether it's students, anyone, any age, they need to see it, or, whether we can stream it for them, because that's so important.
Yeah, I feel like that play would resonate so much with students. Especially if you are, because I feel like a lot of times students or people of that age group sometimes tend to already know how to interact with their peers because they are such open individuals. I don't remember being that open of an individual in terms of interacting with different people when I was a teenager, when I was that age. Like, I don't remember having to talk about gender and race. Like, I just didn't think about it. And I feel like a lot of teenagers nowadays they're the ones out there protesting right now. They're the ones actually creating movements about environmental studies and just trying to get the climate, good, as well as race topics, as well as gender. Like, they're fighting right now. And so I just feel like them seeing this play would actually resonate a lot with them as well, because they've been talking about it. They've been open to have the discussions with each other, with people that differ from them. I agree.
That's great. Any other questions or comments on the play or the topic? All right.
I would love to know Brittany's opinion after she watches the play. Maybe she can email us or something. Just, I know you read it, but like, once you see it, I just want to know what stood out to you, because it was kind of cool to hear other people talk about it the other day.
Yeah, I'm excited because I didn't realize, the actor's name just escaped me, but he plays Eric. I saw him in Sinking Ink in New York, and he was amazing.
Yeah, Nuri Hazard is amazing. Yeah, we'll make sure you get a link for sure. You gotta check.
Okay.
Yes. And for everyone else, there are I think a little under 2 weeks. We only have Dutch Masters to stream for 2 weeks, so please get your links soon. It's a really, really extraordinary play. But let me just also give a little bit of information just for those, if you're not necessarily getting all of our emails. I know sometimes emails go into the void. So you just want to go on northernstage.org, which is our website. And maybe, Kerrigan, if you can drop a link in the chat, that would be awesome. And the festival as a whole is called Tiny Necessary Theater. So once you get onto the Tiny Necessary Theater page, you'll see Dutch Masters. and you'll be able to click to purchase a ticket to watch it streaming online. So all of our streaming productions are extremely accessible. They're only $15 tickets, so we want everyone to see them. And then we also have It's Fine, I'm Fine running live for the next 2 weeks. And so we hope to see you at all of these. And, you know, just because we can't hang out with you in the lobby, please like email us, tell us what you think. We really want to hear your responses to these pieces. We're really excited about them. And thank you all so much for joining us. Have an incredible Sunday. And thank you so much, Brittany, for being with us again. It's like
No problem.
joy and pleasure. So thank you all. Happy Sunday.